Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to another episode of Steelers War Room. I'm your host of this show, Matty, the host of the show, likes to put you in the minds of Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, and the rest of the Steelers front office as they look to put together a winning roster in 2023 and beyond. That used to be the intro to all my War Room podcasts back on Steel Curtain Network, behind the Steel Curtain. And, you know, that's always the theme of the show. Sometimes I don't say it, sometimes I do. I thought it was really fitting because we're a few days out from the draft. When this goes live to air, it'll be a few days for me. When you guys get it, it'll be maybe 3 or 4, depending on all the different time zones that we've got. So this will be one of 3 podcasts and videos. So podcasts for Steelers TDU on Apple, Anchor, Spotify, and Steelers Touchdown over on YouTube, which you're watching right now, most of you probably. And so this is one of 3-part series on my top 75 players in this year's draft. And spread across 3 days. Now, it's weighted, obviously, probably more heavily to not day one. Today's podcast is mainly going to be about day one scenarios, day one players, my personal top picks that I think fit the Steelers. So I've done this top 75 based on team needs, based on who I like at the positions, where I would personally draft them if I was there. My takes are going to be different to what some of you, like the takes you hear from the NFL mainstream, from other media. I don't get swept up in different hype. I like different players for different reasons. I look at value differently with some players. That's just how I do it. And so I want to bring you in the mind of what I'm thinking about. Top 75, a couple of key highlights. And it's taken me, I actually would tell you 2 or 3 months to get this finally done. I've chopped and changed. I thought I had it set yesterday. And then I spent an hour today sort of cutting 5 players, adding 2. Then I had to cut 1 more. I've also got, which you'll see when we get to day 2 and 3, there's some players that I've got on one day and then I've transferred them to the next because they're worth it in terms of getting them in that day earlier. But if they fall, then obviously you really want to get them too. Or I'm thinking you get back into that round to get another pick if they're there. So top 75, you'll see the day 1 picks shortly. And you've got some highlights of what we're going to cover in today's show. But definitely really interesting in 50-50 split. So I've got that on there on the board. There's 50-50 split between offense and defense. Day 2, we've got 15 offensive players, 23 defensive players, mostly covered on the offensive side by O-linemen. Cornerbacks and linebackers dominated the defense on day 2, but you'll see that on the day 2 video that we do. On day 3, we had 19 offensive players and 15 defensive players. Now, that was after a bit of a shakeup I did. And because we're more defense-dominated early on, you can sort of see the balance where I'm suggesting the Steelers go hard at defense earlier in the draft, which would make sense what they've done the last few drafts, and then get the depth pieces, the extra value, the guys that they think they see value in versus other teams that are deeper on and the guys that are deeper on their board later in the draft. That's kind of more dominated by sort of offensive tackle, wide receiver on the offensive side. And then you've got D lineman and outside linebacker or edge rusher on day 3. So that's kind of how the split breaks down at the moment across my top 75. It's not changing, but that's just what you'll see over the next sort of this podcast through all 3 of the series. Cool. Cover that one. All right. What to remember about round 1? And I noticed I got the double points there. But round 1, basically, what you need to remember that a lot of people forget is in round 2 and beyond, everyone signs a 4-year deal. In round 1, you have the 4 years plus the 5th-year option. That changes the game. Now, remember why that changes the game. That changes the game because as a team, there's some positions that you have to pay more than others. There's some positions where you want to lock someone down for a long time. Now, if it's a wide receiver, tight end, running back, you're locking that guy down there to help your offense and your quarterback. If it's an offensive line guy, you're locking that guy down to protect the quarterback, particularly if you've got a quarterback on his rookie deal. That's the case for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If it's on the defense, you are looking at players that are going to, you need them to perform, but 2, they're players that you don't want to have to pay. So think Minkah Fitzpatrick, think TJ Watt. Now, yeah, we're happy to pay him. We drafted TJ Watt in the first round. We would have loved to have drafted Minkah. We didn't. We traded a first to get him. So you want to make sure, as I said, you want to make sure there's that player. Now, the other thing to remember too is the Steelers are picking at 17. They're just outside the top half of the draft. We don't want the Steelers picking at 17. the year before we picked we got Najee, we got Kenny at 20, sorry, then we got Najee the year before that. And then the year before that, we didn't have a first round pick because we had Claypool. We traded that to get Minka. So, you want to make sure that you're getting, if you're trying to draft that player, it's a value at that position. And that is how I've structured my first round players in terms of the players that I wouldn't mind the Steelers drafting. Now, I'm going to show you it. And I think this is a theme for the rest of the draft, particularly as my players that I like and how I think the Steelers are going to focus. It's going to be trenchy, not trendy. That is the theme that I'm predicting for the Steelers draft in 2023. Trenchy, not trendy. They're not going out to get Jordan Addison. So down the bottom, Jordan Addison ain't happened. They're not going down to get him. They're going to get the guys in the trenches that they can build around. That's an Andy Weidl thing. That's a Pittsburgh Steeler thing. That's a Mike Tomlin thing. And they've got playmakers on the roster. Now, there's one position or maybe two positions where they might bend a little bit outside of this, and that's going to be tight end. I do think they're going to go tight end. There's a lot of value on day 2 and 3. Mark and I have done a couple of mocks now where we get Darnell Washington at 32. But there's guys like Luke Musgrave if you want a flex guy. There's guys later. I don't want to proceed who those names are, but I do have a number of tight ends across day 2 and day 3 when we get to those 2 videos and podcasts. But think again, though, a tight end, if you think about trenches and blocking for running backs or blocking for sort of sweep plays or the motions, that sort of thing, it's trenchy, not trendy. So the other second position is cornerback. Again, cornerback is something where the odds are they're going to take someone pretty early on. We're going to get there in terms of who I'm looking at in terms of 17, but that it's trenchy, not trendy. And what I want to feed on that too is the sexy, whatever you think is going to be the sexy pick at any round, it's less likely to be that. Think Deontay Johnson, Toledo. Think Alex Highsmith, Charlotte, both third rounders. Like, they're going to get some guys. So that's why guys like a Dan Henley, linebacker out of Washington State's interesting player. Jose Ramirez is a good, interesting player out of Eastern Michigan. So you're going to see those sorts of guys pop up, as potential names and potential prospects the Steelers go after. As I've said, I don't think Addison's happening unless they're going to do a trade for DJ on draft day. This just does not make any sense. Now, it does make sense from the perspective before Allen Robinson was traded for. It did make sense if you were going to do that and then look to move DJ after Addison's had a year to build chemistry with Kenny Pickett and Pickens has had his full second year in the league. But after the trade that we've just had in the last week with Allen Robinson, this is not a smart move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is not a smart move to go get Jordan Addison. This isn't a Jamar Chase thing. Jamar Chase was a much more productive wide receiver for LSU than what Addison has been at Pickett, at Pittsburgh, and at USC. Now, you can pull up stats. You can go this thing over that thing. You can do that in the comments. Go for your life. If you can do that, though, please subscribe, hit the like button as well. But if you can go ahead and do that. The thing is that just that pure production, that I kind of call it like lethality, the clinical nature of what like Jamar Chase does. I don't know that Jordan Addison can do that. I prefer Zay Flowers in early the second than I do over Addison. I think there's a bit more pizzazz to Zay Flowers than there is to Addison. But I know there's a lot of people out there, a lot of Steel fans, love Addison, love Pittsburgh Panthers. You want to see that, understand. So with that, those things sort of covered. And also one thing wanted to also share when we go into these players and I talk them through. I've considered scenarios where we trade up, and I've only really considered 1 or 2 players if we trade up, and I've considered guys if we trade down as well, particularly more 2 guys in the trenches rather than anyone else. So let's get into those players. I'm going to bring them all up. You're going to have separate slides. You can have a look at all of them. I'm going to go top down, and let's get into them. All right. Now, first one off the board is Christian Gonzalez. Now, a lot of teams, the narrative around the NFL right now is a lot of teams have actually got Devin Witherspoon higher overall, he's probably a more round cornerback, can play every scheme, more skilled player. Christian Gonzalez, though, is very, very far. Is a bit faster, much faster, and is like 6'2". I think Devin Witherspoon's just on 6'1", but Christian Gonzalez is more towards 6'3". Huge. That's kind of the technical there. I've got it there because it depends on how it. So I think Devin Witherspoon's got a. I think Devin Witherspoon's got a higher ceiling, but I also think he's kind of got a lower floor. So I think you could see Devin Witherspoon basically taken anywhere sort of between. I honestly think. I mean, the Seattle Seahawks have got some corners, but I think anywhere between 5. I mean, it depends. Carter would have to be off the board by then, and you don't know about trades. But like in the current way the draft order is, you could see anywhere between 5 and I reckon maybe 14 is where you'd see a Devin Witherspoon go. Whereas a Christian Gonzalez, I think you're looking at like 7. It depends if the Raiders swap around with Detroit, but so you could be looking at 6 or 7. Max to 12. I don't think he gets past that, particularly for Houston. If they go quarterback in round 2, Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson will be off the board. Then at 12, they go get a guy to pair with Derek Stingley. They've got an awesome secondary they're starting to build there, which would be perfect for a D'Amico Ryans led Texan team. So I've got those two guys there because if the Steelers do trade up, I much don't want them to trade up. I think they need every pick they can get over the next couple of drafts. Why Kenny Pickett is here on his rookie deal. I don't like it. I've covered it. I also think they're the top 2 cornerbacks in the draft. Next 2 guys on the list, Broderick Jones and Darnell Wright. So my gut says the Steelers go offensive line. I know I've got a defensive line in there. I know I've got some cornerbacks in there. I think Broderick Jones is their number 1 guy. I think Darnell Wright's the second guy. I don't think Paris Johnson is the guy that they want. I also think, he's probably going to be taken. I don't see him dropping past the Jets. Now, Darnell Wright is being considered the number 2 ahead of Jones in some evaluations quite late in this process. People do like his size. A lot of people have been penciling on the right. I note that at the Senior Bowl, the Steelers asked him if he wanted to play on the left. I kind of think Darnell Wright is the guy, assuming Jones is not available. That's what I'm seeing right now. Now, interesting the guys I got on this list, especially as we get into Deontay Banks. Look at PFF. I'm not always a fan of everything PFF does. They've got Deontay Banks ranked 18, Michael Mayer 19, Broderick Jones 20, Joey Porter 21, Darnell Wright 22, Addison 23. I just wanted to provide that context. DJ has also done his 150 players as well that's come out. And these guys are, I think Jones is just ahead of Wright currently as well. I think it's like 20 versus like maybe 31 or something. But that's kind of how I see it right now. And I think it's going to be one of these 2 guys. If it's not, I think it's most likely to be Deontay Banks. People go, what the heck? What about Joey Porter Jr.? I don't have, with what the Steelers do, I do not have a first round grade, or maybe I should say I don't have a top 25 grade. Where the Steelers are picking, the way the defense plays, I don't have a top 25 grade on Joey Porter. Why? Because these couple of reasons. One, he's not as versatile as the other cornerbacks, including Deontay Banks. And Deontay Banks is 6'2", like 204, 205 pounds. Can do everything, play every schemes, a hard tackle, played at Maryland. There's the Mike Tomlin connection there. There's other connections there. I think he's that guy. You can talk about all the connections with Joey Porter Jr., but the guy didn't even do the 3-cone at the combine. He really focused on the 40 because he wanted to get a fast 40. I get gaming the system, but I didn't like that. I want to see, I do think that drill is important. He's also a guy that people talk about the production with interceptions. That can be a very scheme thing in college. But the thing for me is that he is so dependent on playing man coverage, press coverage. And even though the Steelers played a lot more of that last year, there's not grades all the way through the season. PFF had them about a 42 to 45% through 11 weeks of the season. I found another stat on Twitter that said they played about 45% overall last year. And that's a very Terrell Austin thing versus a Keith Butler thing. Even though they're playing more man, to me, that's a liability. You need someone to be versatile, particularly if you're going to spend a top 20 pick on them. Like, if Kenny Pickett wasn't athletic, Steeler fans would hate that we drafted him at 20. Same goes here for cornerback. You've got to be able to do everything if you're going to be drafted in the top 20 picks in the NFL draft. He can't do all of those things. He is a bit more limited there. Therefore, for me, unless the Steelers traded back past 25 and he was sitting there, and I don't think he'd get past. I mean, Detroit, depending on what they do in pick 6, I think Detroit could pick him. Again, I think the Seahawks could pick him. I don't see the Chargers picking him. That would make sense to them. I could see the Raiders picking him, and certainly the Vikings would love to get him. And Vikings would probably trade up toward where the Seahawks Chargers are to get him, actually, with some of the corners that the depth they need at corner. And if they don't, if the Steelers redraft him, they'd love Deontay Banks and they'll be laughing at the bank. On the flip side, Brian Breesy was my pick for probably about a month, 6 weeks from about March. Now, the Steelers had a really good conversation with him. He's got really great characters, been through a lot of adversity. He's at Clemson. Mike Tomlin had and some of the other Steelers front office had quite a big presence at Clemson. I quite like the tight end there as well. So you'll see him on day 2 and day 3 potentially in my in my top 75. But Brian Brees is probably the top ranked DL out of defensive lineman outside of Jalen Carter. He's a bit ahead of Keanu Benson, and he's a bit ahead of Mazai Smith as well. He's going to be an interesting one. You probably could trade back a few spots and grab him. If Jalen Carter was not to go because the Seahawks weren't going at 5, they could always pick a quarterback as well, all things considered, even with Geno. Particularly a guy like Will Levis, I could see that over Anthony Richardson. But let's say they didn't, for whatever reason, they didn't get Carter at 5. Brian Breesy could be someone they get. So, I don't know how far you'd want to trade back. Now, if they skipped Carter, though, Carter probably I don't think he drops past the Detroit. So they're not picking him. Vita Vea is at the Buccaneers. So you probably could trade back 3 spots, acquire more picks, and still get Brian Breesy. But then also there's a couple of teams here. Washington wouldn't be in for him. I don't think Green Bay really want him. They've got Kenny Clark. He's the sort of guy that maybe Belichick picks, but Belichick doesn't get to pick this high. And also, they might do something for a quarterback considering all the Mac Jones narrative. So Brian Breesy could be there. I don't see him falling probably past the Jags or the Giants. But you could, as I say, you could trade back a couple of spots and still grab Brian Breesy, and you'd be probably pretty happy with that. So the next guy that I've got on the list is Osiris Torrance. Now, this is probably more if they trade back, unless there's a super run on offensive linemen. You're going to have to see Peter Skoronski go. You're going to have to see all the tackles go. I like Osiris Torrance. I do like him at 32, and I don't care if because they got Jones in round 1, I wouldn't care if they got Torrance at 32 and just beefed up that O-line. He's a massive guy. He's like 6'5". He's young. He's 337 pounds. I love it. And the final player is the biggest draft crush I've had in the draft the whole way through since before round 1 of the season or week 1 of the season last year, Steve Avila. Now, he's a guy that's I think DJ has him at 37 on his list. I'm actually going to pull that up while we're talking about it. I think he's 37 on DJ's list. So obviously that puts him outside the first round. But with Avila, so Brian Brees is 36, Avila's 37. So the thing with Avila, though, he can play anywhere on the interior. He was very instrumental in Max Duggan being able to throw the football for TCU. Really big guy, had a lot of hype going into the season. And unlike a lot of players that have hype going into their final season before they declare for the draft, he actually delivered. He did not deliver. And so he's a guy that the reason I put him here and same as Osiris Torrance is back to that narrative around the 5th-year option. You get the 5th-year option with these guys, you lock them in, cheap at the position. But I wanted to put Avila in here because if the Steelers were to trade back to get multiple day 2 picks for trading back and then get like an extra 2nd or a 3rd and a 4th or even a 2nd and a 5th, something like that. And remember, the Steelers have like a 110 pick gap now, 112 pick gap between 120 and in round 4 and when they pick again in round 7. So I have said this for probably 6 weeks now on the rest of our shows with Marky D, on the Mad Monday show or the Touchdown Underboys show. I do think the The Steelers will trade back to get there. That's a very long distance with a lot of late talent. And that kind of reflects a little bit in my top 75 when we do my, the day 2 and day 3 shows. But if you move back, and let's say you're picking anywhere from 24, the Jags onwards, picking Osiris Torrance or Steve Avila is not a dumb idea at all. So and if you're seeing a run, do you trade back in from 32 and you get 2 guys on a 5th-year deal? That's something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about. Steelers trading back in. I think you want to see the Steelers. The reason why they probably won't use 32 in a trade to move up or to get back into the first round is that they're the first pick on day 2. So any player that a team absolutely loved that's not there, and this could be factoring. Sometimes you'll be sitting there going, okay, we're picking, anywhere between 11 and, maybe 27. So between the Titans and the Bills, we're going to trade back in. I mean, the Jets have a couple of picks. I mean, they've just traded them now as I go to air. About 6 or 7 hours ago, we heard about trade for Rodgers. So I want to hear exactly what goes through there. But there are some teams that have got multiple picks that might go, hey, Steelers, how do we get your 32? And Mark and I did a mock draft on the Mad Monday show where we traded back 3 spots with the Colts. We traded the 80th pick and the 32nd pick for 35.79. So we moved back 3 in round 2, moved up 1 in round 3. We also acquired their 136th pick, and their 114th pick, and 106th pick, and we acquired their 176th pick. So we traded 2 for 4. We only moved back 3 spots in round 2, moved up 1 in round 3. So that shows you an idea of sort of how the draft can work. And the Steelers are ranked 12 or 14th in overall draft capital value in this year's draft, according to PFF. So kind of interesting there. But as I said, I wanted to build in 2 scenarios where they trade up, 2 scenarios where they trade back. What do those guys look like? And again, if Gonzalez with the spoon fell, honestly, I think if Gonzalez is sitting there when the Texans are picking, I think the Steelers would probably trade up. I don't know where they would for Witherspoon, but I don't see him getting past the Patriots, maybe not even past the Jets, because you could pair him with Sauce Gardner, and that would be a pretty lights out secondary. So I really think it's probably these guys on the screen that you see in Broderick Jones, done all right, Deontay Banks or Brian Breesy. I think the Steelers pick is one of those guys. Now, if it's not, it could well be Joey Porter. Yes, I have included Joey Porter in my day 2, guys, not to fret. I mean, he was sitting there at 32, you'd love it. Again, though, if he was sitting there when someone like, the Ravens are picking, do you go up and swap there? I don't want to see the Steelers trade up. I don't want them to spend capital. I've said that, but anything can happen on draft day. We had 13 trades of day 1, 13 trades on day 1 of the draft last year. Between different picks and different things going different places and players and what have you. You never know what's going to be around the corner with these situations. But I want to give you a sense of the 8 players I'm thinking about. Look, the Steelers might not draft any of these guys. I might be completely wrong. But if I'm sitting there right now, these are the guys I feel comfortable with. I want to get better in the trenches. Maybe I want to consider a cornerback. But you've got to keep Kenny upright. That is how as much as Pittsburgh Steelers are known for their defense, they've invested in Kenny Pickett. They've invested in offensive linemen and the interior, really important, in free agency. Okoro falls on a deal where you're not really getting rid of. You'd have to have a nice trade for him, and I don't think he's there on the radar for a lot of teams. So really, there's more that you might want to kick inside. It's that left tackle, and there's really 3 guys there in Broderick Jones, Paris Johnson, Darnell Wright. I don't really think Paris Johnson fits what they like. I like the bigger body, rougher guy, and I think these 2 guys are better in run blocking, just from what I've personally seen. Not that I've sat there and watched a heap of Paris Johnson tape, but that's just what I feel. So yeah, this is my 8 guys that I'd be open to. I know there's some people that are regular listeners and fans and subscribers that sit there and go, no, I want Addison, I want this guy, I want that guy, and you might even hate these guys on the board. That's fine. We all get a chance to play armchair GM in the lead up to the draft. But these are guys that I said I've thought about in every different scenario, and guys that I think could make the Steelers better day 1 of the season. And all of those guys can do that. And the thing is as well, and don't rule this out, Steelers drafted an offensive lineman on the interior. They can move Dotson. Dotson's in his last year. If you get a third or a fourth, and someone will give up at least a fourth for Dotson, you do that, you can then bring in another player that fills the need, particularly when we're needing linebackers, safeties as well, like safeties and unsung, or I feel like it's a hidden need that's going quite unacknowledged by a lot of sort of media out there covering the Steelers. But anyway, looking forward to hearing what you thought of my round one players and how I think the Steelers will approach round one overall and things to look out for. Remember, trendy, not trendy. And if you like the show, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to us, please do subscribe to it, and also hit the bell icon if you want the notifications if you're already subscribed. It's going to get really exciting as we head into the draft. Stay tuned for my day 2 and day 3 vids. Can't wait to get them out. And on the podcast side, we'll get the audio to you too. And as always, go Steelers.